Most killers try to hide their crimes. This dude, he stabs someone like 61 times and then literally dials 911 going, I did it. Oopsie, my bad. And not in a tough voice either. No, he's sobbing, ugly crying. The kind of crying you hear from a toddler who just dropped their ice cream. That's why America remembers him as the Crybaby Killer. And honestly, he earned that nickname. He couldn't even keep his mouth shut. He basically did the cops' job for them. Every crime, every call, tears on the line. Let's dive into this disaster of a criminal career. Paul Michael Stephani, born in 1944, Minnesota boy, Catholic family, one of 6 kids, strict mom, abusive stepdad, lots of rules, zero warmth. So yeah, his childhood, ice cold. He grows up bitter, awkward, and looking for control. But instead of getting therapy like a normal human being, he picks the worst possible hobby, hurting women. And here are the names you need to know. Karen Potack, 20, college student, the first known victim. Kimberly Compton, 18, full of hope, new to St. Paul. Barbara Simons, 40, a nurse, met him for drinks at a bar. Denise Williams, 19, a fighter, and the only one who flipped the script on him. So picture this. It's New Year's Eve 1980 in St. Paul, Minnesota. Everyone's out celebrating, drinking, kissing strangers, making promises they'll never keep. But not Paul Stephani. Nope, he's out hunting. He crosses paths with Karen Potack, a 20-year-old college student. She had been out partying with her sisters, but around midnight she just disappears. Her sisters think she probably went home early. Spoiler, she didn't. Paul attacks her in the most brutal way. He beats her with a tire iron and leaves her on the ground bleeding. And just when you think he's done being insane, he does his trademark move. He picks up a payphone, calls 911, and in the whiniest, tear-choked voice says, "There's a girl hurt. Send help. Hurry before it's too late." The police rush to the scene and shocker, they find Karen exactly where he said she'd be. She's barely alive. She survives, but with brain damage and permanent memory loss. She can't remember a thing about the attack, not even what her attacker looked like. And here's the crazy part, Paul never says he did it. He just sounds like some concerned random guy reporting an emergency. But come on. How did he know the exact spot where she was lying in the snow almost frozen to death? Yeah, red flag number 1. This was the world's introduction to the Crybaby Killer. A maniac who would hurt you, then dial the police crying like he just watched the ending of Titanic. Fast forward a few months to June 3rd, 1981. Kimberly Compton, just 18 years old, had hopped on a bus to St. Paul. She was fresh out of high school, looking for a job, looking for a new start. Imagine the energy, new city, new future, first taste of independence. But the first person she meets, Paul Stephani, worst welcome wagon ever. He offers her a ride. She trusts him. Why wouldn't she? He looks like a regular guy, not some horror movie villain. But instead of showing her around town, he takes her to a quiet spot and pulls out, wait for it, a screwdriver. Not a gun, not a knife, a literal screwdriver. And then he stabs her. Not once, not twice, but 61 times. 61. And just like before, the killer can't resist the phone. Minutes later, 911 picks up and hears that same sobbing, trembling voice. "I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop. Please find me." Police are stunned. Nobody outside the investigation even knew what weapon was used. And yet here's this anonymous crybaby blurting out the exact details: screwdriver, ice pick, whatever. He's basically proving he's the guy. Kimberly's murder is brutal, senseless, and it's his first official kill. But Paul isn't acting like your typical criminal mastermind. He's leaving breadcrumbs with every phone call. It's like he wants to be caught, but also doesn't. And that's when the media starts buzzing. The man with the weepy phone calls, he gets his nickname, the Weepy-Voiced Killer. It's August 1982, summer night in Minneapolis. Barbara Simons, a 40-year-old nurse, heads out to a local bar. She's friendly, outgoing, and she just wants to enjoy her evening. And guess who she meets there? Yep, Paul Stephani. He's hanging around making small talk, and Barbara, being polite, chats with him. Witnesses later say she even joked with the bartender, saying something like, "Wish me luck, I hope this guy is nice." About that. She leaves the bar with him. And that's the last time anyone sees her alive. The next day, Barbara's body is discovered near the Mississippi River. She'd been stabbed over 40 times. And right on cue, the weepy caller is back. Paul dials the police, his voice cracking, words tumbling out between sobs. "I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her. Kimberly Compton was the first one." That call flips the investigation on its head. He's not only confessing to Barbara's murder, but he's also linking himself back to Kimberly. And the police, they finally realize this is not random. They've got a serial killer who literally calls in his own crimes. It's one of the strangest criminal patterns investigators had ever seen. Brutal violence followed by pathetic sobbing on the phone. It was like a horror movie villain crossed with a bad soap opera actor. At this point, the cops know they need to catch him fast, but they don't know his name yet. They just have the voice. August 1982 isn't done yet. Just a few days after Barbara Simons' murder, Paul Stephani is back on the prowl. This time he picks up Denise Williams, a 19-year-old sex worker. She gets into his car, probably thinking it's just another client. But Paul, he's got the screwdriver again. He drives her to an isolated spot near a factory and suddenly lunges at her, stabbing over and over. Denise realizes fast, this isn't a client, this is a killer. Now here's where things flip. Denise fights back. She grabs a glass soda bottle, smashes it across his face, and bolts from the car. She's bleeding badly, but she's still alive and she's running. A random man nearby sees what's happening, shouts at Stephani, and suddenly the so-called tough guy killer panics. He jumps in his car and speeds off. But here's the kicker. Paul is injured. That broken bottle cut him up. And because he can't stop himself, he does what he always does, he calls for help. He actually dials 911 to get an ambulance for his wounds. Same shaky, high-pitched voice. Same sobbing. Police finally connect the dots. They realize the crying caller begging for medical help is the same guy who's been calling about the murders. They check the hospital records, trace the injuries, and guess who shows up at the with cuts all over his face? Paul Michael Stephani. Denise, still recovering, looks at his photo and immediately says, "That's him. The Crybaby Killer is caught." So Paul Michael Stephani gets hauled into court. By now, cops have the survivor's testimony, the phone calls, and the visit that exposed him. But here's the tricky part. They want to prove that the crying voice on all those 911 calls is his. In comes the star witnesses. His ex-wife, his roommate, and even his own sister. They all listen to the tapes of the weepy caller and say the same thing. That's Paul. Imagine sitting in court while your family and friends are basically like, yep, that pathetic sobbing voice belongs to him. Brutal. But here's where it gets weird. The judge doesn't even allow the voice comparison as hard evidence. Why? Because the calls were distorted by crying and the court thought it might not be reliable. So the big, "this is his voice" angle tossed out. Didn't matter though. The prosecution still had Denise Williams pointing straight at him saying, "That's the guy who tried to kill me." And they had Barbara Simons' case lined up with eyewitnesses from the bar. That was enough. In 1984, Stephani is convicted of the attempted murder of Denise Williams and the murder of Barbara Simons. The sentence? 58 years behind bars. The so-called Crybaby Killer is now crying in prison. Fast forward to the late 1990s. Paul Michael Stephani is in prison and he's no longer the dangerous guy stalking bars. He's sick. Doctors diagnose him with skin cancer and it's terminal. Suddenly, the Crybaby Killer doesn't just sound like a nickname anymore, his whole life is one long cry. Facing death, Paul decides he wants to clear his conscience. Translation: he finally admits to the murders he always danced around. He confesses to the attack on Karen Potack, the college student who barely survived with brain damage. He confesses to the murder of Kimberly Compton, the 18-year-old new in town who he stabbed 61 times. And he admits to killing Kathleen Greening, a 33-year-old schoolteacher who was found drowned in her bathtub back in 1982. At the time, people thought her husband might have done it. Turns out, nope, it was Paul. All these years he'd been holding back, and now on his way out he spills it all. He even described details that only the real killer would know, like where he left belongings or how he staged things. Investigators finally had confirmation that this weepy voice was behind more than just the known cases. On June 12, 1998, Paul Michael Stephani dies in a prison hospital. No tears left to shed. Here's the haunting part. The very thing that made him dangerous, that need to lash out violently, came with an equally bizarre need to confess. He couldn't stop himself from picking up the phone and sobbing into the receiver. He thought those calls were apologies, but really they were roadmaps. Every tear-stained word pulled him closer to being caught. He wanted forgiveness, but all he gave investigators was evidence. So the Crybaby Killer's legacy isn't just about murder. It's about irony. He tried to cry his way out of guilt, but in the end his own sobs told the world exactly who he was.